Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a snow-glazed village where boredom has been fermenting behind leaded glass windows and creaky floorboards. You're in Salem, Massachusetts, winter of 1691, and if you're hoping for action, you'll have to make your own. Outside, the trees are frozen in place. The livestock is grumpy. And the Puritan calendar is distressingly empty of parties. Inside one cramped parsonage, the firewood is low, the sermons are long, and your teenage cousins are inventing new ways to pass the time. One has taken to staring into glasses of water while muttering about boys. Another is flicking grains of corn at the wall to see if they stick. Spoiler, they do not. It's cold, it's dark by mid-afternoon, and you're wearing so many layers of wool that your arms don't bend properly. In short, this is a recipe for spiritual disaster. You probably won't survive this Puritan slumber party without accusing someone of dancing with the devil. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're up, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through ankle-deep snow to the heart of Salem village, where half-frozen fences and soot-dusted roofs lean against the white sky like they've all agreed to collapse politely. The town is a cluster of mismatched cabins, narrow cowpaths, and deeply suspicious neighbors. It's quiet, yes, but not peaceful. There's tension simmering under the frost. The land here is still scarred by native wars. The local church is split into factions. And people keep arguing about the minister's firewood allowance. Puritan life in the 17th century is not exactly built for joy. You wake up early, pray a lot, chop wood, hope for beans at supper, and get judged for sneezing too loudly. Entertainment? That's for sinners. Or Anglicans. So when winter arrives like a giant ice quilt over the countryside, it traps everything, including emotions. You're stuck indoors, breathing the same smoky air as your relatives, hearing the same psalms over and over, slowly losing your grip on reality. Historians still argue whether cabin fever helped ignite the madness of 1692, but frankly, it's hard to imagine it didn't play a role. Even the cows are edgy. In the home of Reverend Samuel Paris, the local minister with the charisma of a damp sermon, his household is a pressure cooker of boredom, piety, and barely repressed snark. His 9-year-old daughter Betty and 11-year-old niece Abigail live under strict rules, narrow expectations, and an almost total lack of hobbies. The fact that they didn't start accusing the cat first is almost admirable. You can picture them huddled near the hearth, whispering, watching the flames for patterns, daring each other to say things no proper Puritan girl would utter. They play a game one evening, something with an egg yolk and a mirror, borrowed from English folk customs. The goal? To see the face of your future husband. The result? Confusion, maybe laughter, and then, quiet. A kind of hush that falls when someone realizes they've just crossed a line. Because in Salem, the supernatural is not a source of fun. It's a tangible threat. The devil, after all, is considered a literal figure, lurking in the woods, recruiting souls like it's a multi-level marketing scheme. And the girls, whether play-acting or genuinely unnerved, begin to react. Strange fits. Screams. Contortions. Barking like dogs, writhing on the floor. Reverend Paris is horrified, less by the symptoms than by the possibility that his household might be under demonic attack. That kind of thing doesn't look good on a resume. Especially not when you're already unpopular. News spreads. Because in a village this small, anything louder than a sneeze travels faster than an ox cart on market day. And suddenly these bizarre episodes are all anyone can talk about. Not the corn tax. Not the wolves in the woods. No, everyone wants to know why 2 girls are rolling on the floor and screaming about pinches and shadows. Soon other young girls start displaying similar symptoms. It's not exactly catching, but it is strangely contagious. One twitches, and another follows. One cries out, and the next adds harmonies. Is it possession? Is it hysteria? Is it just the world's bleakest talent show? Quirky historical side note. There's some speculation that ergot poisoning, caused by moldy rye bread, might have played a part. Ergot can produce hallucinations, spasms, and panic. But most historians agree it probably doesn't explain everything. More likely, this was a case of psychological copycatting, amplified by the thrill of being the center of attention in a culture that otherwise tells you to sit down and hush. And here's the real twist: these girls are not entirely powerless. In a society that limits them to obedience and needlework, suddenly everyone is looking at them. Adults listen to them. Write down what they say. Take their words as truth. That's a heady experience for anyone, but especially for children who have never been taken seriously before. You can imagine Abigail, warming to the role. You can almost hear the thoughts: they're watching me. They believe me. I matter. It's a strange, inverted sort of empowerment. And it will have devastating consequences. So that's the stage: a freezing village, a humorless faith, a few restless teenagers, and just enough folk superstition to spice things up. From here, things escalate fast. Salem doesn't believe in moderation, especially not when it comes to the devil. The snows outside deepen. The list of afflicted girls grows longer. And beneath it all, the most dangerous idea of all begins to root: someone must be responsible. You're still in the parsonage, but now the fire crackles a little louder. Betty Paris lies curled on a bench near the hearth, eyes glassy, lips murmuring something no one can quite hear. Abigail Williams stands rigid, staring into the middle distance like she's waiting for the devil to tap her on the shoulder. The room is tense, part tragedy, part theater, and entirely inexplicable. Reverend Paris paces. He's not a man inclined toward mystery. He needs answers. Preferably the kind he can quote from Scripture. So he calls in help, first the neighbors, then the village doctor, a man named William Griggs. And Griggs, after presumably poking and squinting for a few minutes, announces the diagnosis: the evil hand is upon them. Which is 1692 speak for, yeah, seems like witches. This is how things spiral. You can feel the air shift as that word, witch, seeps into the walls. Salem didn't invent witchcraft panic, but it imported it faithfully from England, where a couple of centuries of paranoia had already written the manual. Witches, in the Puritan worldview, aren't fairy tale crones with broomsticks. They're people, real ones, who've entered into pacts with Satan. That pact gives them power. Power makes them dangerous. And danger means you can never be too careful. So the question becomes, who's doing this to the girls? Abigail, Betty, and the others are only too willing to help answer. The first three names roll out like pebbles starting an avalanche. Tituba, the enslaved woman from the Caribbean who works in the Paris household. Sarah Good, a destitute woman known for muttering under her breath. Sarah Osborne, an older woman who rarely goes to church. In other words, the outsider, the poor, and the inconvenient. And you can see how this takes root so quickly. Salem isn't a town of tolerance. It's a town of grievances stacked like cordwood. Land disputes, inheritance feuds, simmering resentments. Everyone has a grudge or two tucked into their apron pocket. Witchcraft just gives them a way to finally say the quiet part out loud. Tituba's story is especially complex. When she's arrested and questioned, she doesn't just deny the charges, she expands on them. Claims she's seen a tall man in black. Talks about animals and witches' meetings. She weaves a story so colorful it makes the Puritans squirm. Some scholars argue she was trying to protect herself by giving them what they wanted. Others think she was mocking them. But either way, her confession adds fuel to the fire. Now it's not just a witch, it's a coven. Possibly an international franchise. Meanwhile, Sarah Good is hauled into court looking more bewildered than bewitched. She's poor, often unhoused, and has a tendency to mumble. That's not a crime. But it feels wrong to Salem's watchful eyes. She's everything they fear might happen to them if they're not careful. Her guilt isn't proven, it's assumed. Sarah Osborne fares no better. Her health is poor. She rarely attends church. And she once dared to marry her servant. To a Puritan audience, That's 2 red flags and a parade. She's dead within weeks, officially from jail conditions, unofficially from stress, cold, and possibly a broken system. And just like that, the accusations multiply. You see, once you accept that witches exist and might be your neighbors, it becomes a game of spiritual hide-and-seek. And it rewards imagination. Every sneeze is suspect. Every strange dream, every spoiled pie, every bout of colic in a goat, potentially the devil's handiwork. It becomes a logic loop. You know witches are real because you've accused them. You've accused them because witches are real. Even the courts start to adapt. The colony's leaders, brilliantly choosing this moment to lose all sense, decide to allow spectral evidence. That's testimony that a ghostly version of someone appeared to you in a vision and did something evil. Yes, that's legally allowed now. No, it doesn't hold up great on appeal. Imagine standing trial and having someone say, "I saw your ghost choke my cousin while she was asleep." And that's enough to get you convicted. Historians still argue whether the judges truly believed this nonsense, or just found it politically convenient. But the result is the same. Courts turn into theater. Hysteria becomes policy. And no one, not the skeptical, not the powerful, not even the pious, is truly safe. Even children start testifying. In fact, the younger, the better. Some were as young as 5. It's like a Sunday school production rewritten by Edgar Allan Poe. The afflicted girls take center stage, moaning, writhing, pointing fingers. And the court eats it up. Their drama is now gospel. Quirky tidbit? Some of the girls were later caught sneaking treats, gossiping in the courthouse halls, and playfully mimicking their fits. Whether that was performance or pathology, well, historians still argue about that too. You're standing in the gallery, watching the madness snowball. The fear is tangible. It clings to everyone like the smoke from the courtroom hearth. And if someone looks at you a second too long, or you forgot to say amen with proper enthusiasm, you start wondering if you'll be next. Outside, the snow begins to melt. But the chill in Salem only deepens. You wake to the smell of wood smoke and damp wool, your feet crunching lightly across frost-kissed dirt. The Salem you're wandering through now is no longer just anxious. It's fully inflamed. Word has spread. The accusations are multiplying like mildew on a Puritan cellar wall. And so are the watchers. You pass the meeting house, and it's packed again. Townsfolk lean in like they're at a play. The girls, Betty, Abigail, and Putnam, Mercy Lewis, are no longer shy witnesses. They're center stage, delivering daily performances of convulsions, shrieks, and finger-pointing. They claim to see witches perched in rafters, riding broomsticks invisible to all but the righteous. And the town listens. You stop near the steps, catching whispers of the latest charges. There are new names: Martha Corey, a church-going woman who dared to doubt the girls; Rebecca Nurse, a well-respected grandmother; even George Burroughs, a former minister now living in Maine. The pattern's emerging. Anyone who questions the trials gets accused. Any woman with too much land, too much age, or too much independence becomes suspicious by default. Salem is no longer trying to root out evil. It's eating itself alive. The jails fill. Boston, Ipswich, Salem town. Damp, narrow, foul places. Some of the accused are shackled in place, unable to lie down. Others lie in straw, whispering prayers they're not sure God can hear. You peek through a small barred window and see a woman curled against a stone wall, lips moving without sound. That's Bridget Bishop, one of the more colorful characters in Salem. She ran a tavern, wore red bodices, and was known to speak her mind, a dangerous combo. She's the first to hang. June 10th, 1692. A Friday. They take her to Gallows Hill, a rocky outcrop just outside town. No proper scaffold, just a tree, a cart, a rope, and a crowd. She prays. The wind rustles. The cart is pulled. And just like that, the Puritans have their first confirmed witch. You watch from a hilltop, far enough to feel safe, close enough to feel chilled. It's not just her death, it's how fast the town moves on. More executions follow. Sarah Good. Susanna Martin, Elizabeth Howe, George Jacobs. One by one. Hanged, not burned. Contrary to popular myth, Salem's Puritans didn't go full medieval. But don't congratulate them just yet. And then comes a turning point. Giles Corey. Remember him. He's in his 80s, stubborn as a millstone, accused largely because his wife, Martha, is already in trouble. But Giles refuses to plead guilty or innocent. He knows the game is rigged. Instead, he says nothing. So they press him. Literally. They strip him, lay him between boards, and pile stones on his chest. Day after day. More weight, he croaks famously. It's both defiance and resignation. He dies 2 days in. Crushed, silent, and, technically, never convicted. Historians still argue whether he did it to protect his estate from being seized, or simply because he refused to give a broken court what it wanted. Either way, Giles becomes the most iconic martyr of Salem's absurdity. Meanwhile, even the judges start sweating. The jails are overflowing. The executions mount. And some of the accused are, frankly, inconvenient. High status, well-connected, too publicly beloved. Doubts trickle in like a leaky roof. Samuel Sewell, one of the judges, begins having nightmares. Cotton Mather, theologian, minister, occasional chaos instigator, starts hedging his bets. And then, perhaps inevitably, the girls go too far. They accuse the governor's wife. Suddenly, the brakes squeal. Governor William Phipps, until now rather preoccupied with wars and pirates, returns to Boston and says, "Enough." He halts the trials, disbands the special court, and forbids further arrests. The spell begins to break. You pass the empty meeting house again, this time quiet, with the benches cleared. No one is writhing. No one is naming names. Just an echo. The executions stop, but the damage is vast. 20 people executed. More than 200 accused. Countless lives shattered by rumor and fear. And as the dust settles, some of the survivors begin to speak up, carefully. In 1697, the court holds a day of fasting and soul-searching. Judges apologize. The colony offers modest compensation to the families of the dead. But it's too little, too late. Salem's shame is permanent. And yet, strangely, it disappears from textbooks for a while. Perhaps it's too embarrassing. Or too complicated. Or too close to the bone. Quirky tidbit? At least one of the afflicted girls, and Putnam Jr., offers a formal apology as an adult. She claims she was deluded by the devil. Others never recant. Some live quiet lives. Some die young. The town itself eventually changes its name, Danvers, not Salem Village anymore. As if renaming could erase memory. But of course it doesn't. You walk through the quiet lanes now, dust on your boots, air thick with a strange stillness. The trials are over, but their echo lingers, in sermons, in stories, in warnings passed down like worn recipes. And in truth, the real witchcraft here wasn't sorcery. It was fear. Pettiness. Power games. The way rumor grows legs and runs faster than reason. Salem wasn't just a tragedy, it was a mirror. One that still catches the occasional glimpse of modern eyes. You stroll slowly past the still damp field where the gallows once stood, though, by now, most of the wood has been hauled off and repurposed. Someone turned a beam into a barn rafter. Someone else burned a splinter of it for cleansing. Life in Salem, even after all the noise, is eager to pretend it never happened. But you know better. Because if you follow the whispers, they don't stop at the trials. They lead you back, further, deeper, into the soil of the village itself. Where did this start, really? Not with witches. Not even with ministers. But with snow. And teenagers. Picture this, winter 1691. A bitter one. The kind of winter where the trees ache with frost and firewood runs low. Salem Village is small, maybe 500 people, scattered across rough farmland. There's a meeting house, a tavern, a blacksmith, and a deep sense that everyone's business is your business. You trudge past the parsonage now. That's Reverend Samuel Parris's home. a biggish house for the area. Inside, his wife, a few household servants, and most relevantly, his 9-year-old daughter Betty and his 11-year-old niece, Abigail Williams. 2 girls. Too much time. Not enough distractions. You step into their small upstairs chamber, timber-framed, sparse, and probably cold enough to ice your thoughts. No novels. No TikTok. Not even a pet. Just each other, the Bible, and their imaginations. And maybe a servant from Barbados. Tituba. Historians still argue whether Tituba was truly from Barbados or from South America, or whether her origins were filtered through Paris's assumptions. What's certain is that she didn't look like the other villagers, didn't worship like them, and didn't belong to them in any way that felt comfortable. And she may, just may, have told the girls stories. Not necessarily satanic rituals as later claimed. Maybe just ghost tales, island legends, or simple games involving cracking eggs into glasses to tell fortunes. Called molly egging, or Venus glassing, depending on who you ask. Seemed harmless. But to a Puritan, anything not straight from Leviticus was potentially demonic. And these girls? They were bored. Oppressively so. So the games begin. You peek through the door. They whisper. Giggle. Swirl egg whites. Try to predict their future husbands. Then comes the shrieking. The fits. The barking like dogs. The crawling under furniture and clutching their throats. If it's acting, it's Academy-worthy, by 17th century standards. It would have ended there, probably, if Reverend Paris hadn't panicked. He doesn't go to the doctor. He doesn't ask if his daughter's just dramatic. No, he calls in local ministers and elders. And when no physical cause is found, there's only one explanation left. Witchcraft. Always witchcraft. Soon more girls join in. And Putnam Jr., Elizabeth Hubbard, Mercy Lewis. Their fits become louder, more frequent, and crucially, more noticed. You pause near the hearth as the girls' performances escalate. They wail in church, collapse during prayer. One claims a ghost is stabbing her with knitting needles. Another accuses a black dog of trying to strangle her. And people believe it. Because Puritan belief isn't just rigid, it's all-consuming. The devil is not metaphorical here. He walks among them, literally. He whispers. He tempts. He slips into the shoes of your neighbor and borrows her voice. And if you don't root him out, you are next. So, the question becomes, who's doing the devil's work? The girls offer names. 3 to start, Tituba of course. Sarah Good, a homeless woman who mumbles to herself. And Sarah Osborne, who skipped church too often and married her servant. Not exactly the village favorites. You listen to them get dragged from their homes. Sarah Good denies everything. Sarah Osborne is barely coherent. But Tituba, oh, Tituba tells a story. It changes shape depending on which version you believe. But in many tellings she confesses. Says yes, she did speak with the devil. He appeared as a tall man, sometimes as a pig, sometimes as a black dog. He asked her to sign his book. And importantly, she says others signed it too. This is where the fire catches. Because now, the girls aren't just flailing around. They're victims. And if victims, then brave. And if brave, then powerful. Their names carry weight. You duck out the parsonage door as more accusations spiral. The list of alleged witches grows like a fungal bloom, fed by fear, darkness, and the oddly satisfying sense of being in control. Quirky tidbit. Some scholars argue the girl's symptoms resembled those of ergot poisoning, caused by moldy rye. Hallucinations, spasms, paranoia. But others believe it was pure performance. Or maybe a bit of both. Either way, something in Salem was catching. You hear it in the creak of a door, in the murmur of gossip by the well. Someone saw a neighbor dancing in the woods. Someone's baby sickened after a visit from Goody Proctor. Someone's cow dried up. Clearly the work of witches. And in the middle of it all, children. Leading the adults by the nose. It's almost impressive. and incredibly dangerous. You follow the path away from the parsonage now, winding slowly past rows of low-slung homes and frostbitten trees. The wind picks up, and with it, a murmur, not from witches, but from neighbors. Always the neighbors. Salem village may be small, but its grudges are huge. You could stretch one across 3 cornfields and still have enough left to trip over at the market. And that's really where this whole thing picks up speed. Not in the church, not in the courtroom, but in the tangled hedgerows of resentment and petty grievances. Salem wasn't just a sleepy settlement, it was a feud disguised as a town. 2 factions, really, those loyal to the Putnams and those backing the Porters. Land disputes, inheritance squabbles, arguments over who got the best pew in church. The usual cozy community politics, except with pitchforks. You pass the home of Thomas Putnam, patriarch of Team Putnam. He's well off, ambitious, and not so secretly thrilled by the sudden usefulness of his daughter's fits. And Putnam Jr., 12 years old, is one of the loudest accusers. And wouldn't you know it? Many of the people she names are inconvenient to her family. A rival landowner here. A woman who challenged the will there. Funny how the devil always seems to possess the people your father already dislikes. Historians still argue whether Thomas Putnam truly orchestrated the accusations or simply fanned the flames. But the pattern is hard to ignore. Even back then, villagers noticed. One wrote that the accusations fell upon those whom the Putnams were at variance with. You stop by a stone fence now, mossy, low, and probably older than some of the cows. It marks the border between 2 disputed plots. For decades, these stones have meant yours versus mine. But now, they also mark godly versus suspicious. The spiritual and the agricultural are suddenly very much entangled. You remember the name of one such dispute, the Nurse family. Rebecca Nurse is an older woman. Pious. Kind. Widely respected. But she also has the misfortune of being connected to the town family, who once argued with the Putnams over pasture land. And when Putnam Jr. starts convulsing and sobbing at the mention of Goody Nurse, it's enough for the court to arrest her. It doesn't matter that she's a grandmother. It doesn't matter that even her enemies admit she's the picture of Christian charity. Because if a child says she saw you with the devil, well, who are you to argue? This is where it gets naughty. Because some villagers truly believe in the accusations. Others go along out of fear. Still others see an opportunity. That's another thing people forget. Not all accusers were teenagers. Some were adults. And some had very grown-up motivations. Property, revenge, even plain boredom. After all, in a community where social climbing is limited and entertainment is scarce, becoming God's informant is an irresistible role. You walk past a barn now, door ajar, hay stacked like history. Inside, a woman mutters to herself, glancing over her shoulder. She hasn't been accused yet, but she's worried. She heard someone saw her picking herbs alone by the river. Suspicious behavior, apparently. So she's keeping her head down, praying twice as loud, and wearing her plainest apron. You get the feeling she's not alone. The whole town is jittery. Everyone's suddenly watching everyone else. Who didn't attend the last sermon? Who whispered during the Lord's Prayer? Who owns a cat? Who sells herbs? Who makes eye contact and who doesn't? Salem becomes a panopticon of Puritan paranoia. You don't know who's watching, but you know they're out there. And if you're unlucky, they're 12 years old and have a vivid imagination. Quirky fact, some accused witches were said to have familiars, supernatural animal companions. These weren't just black cats, but frogs, yellow birds, even a dog named Satan. One poor dog was shot by a concerned citizen who thought it looked at him knowingly. The dog, unsurprisingly, could not confirm. You pause near a frozen stream, listening to the wind shift through bare branches. This place is cold, not just in temperature but in spirit. There's something heavy here. The weight of suspicion, of hypocrisy cloaked in righteousness. But there's also something deeply human. The villagers aren't monsters. They're scared. They want answers. And in a world where medicine is patchy, science is distrusted, and dreams are as real as daylight, Which makes a kind of terrible sense. Better to blame a neighbor than admit the randomness of misfortune. Better to fear a scapegoat than stare into the chaos of a dying cow or a sick child. And so the trials continue. And the village begins to unravel, quietly, with the polite rustling of bonnets and the occasional loud gasp. You move on, boots crunching through frost. Somewhere behind you, a rooster crows. The sun is trying to rise, but the fog lingers like regret. And you realize Salem wasn't cursed by witches. It was cursed by grudges. You walk now through the heart of Salem village, where the road is still dirt and the houses lean ever so slightly, as if they, too, are listening in. Around you, shutters are just beginning to creak open for the day, but everyone moves slower than usual, glancing up and down the lane like sleepwalkers. Something's in the air. A tension you can't name, but definitely wouldn't want to breathe in too deeply. The gossip is spreading faster than the winter frost. You overhear two men speaking in hushed voices about Bridget Bishop, a tavern owner from Salem town. She wears bright clothing. Red. Silk. Once she argued with a neighbor. Another time, she laughed too loudly during a sermon. Suspicious, all of it. Suspicious enough that, even though she lives in the more worldly Salem town, her name has now appeared on a list. Bridget Bishop will be the first to hang. Historians still argue whether she was targeted for her reputation or simply chosen as a symbolic example, proof that the court meant business. But one thing's certain, Bridget stood out, and in a community allergic to difference, that's never a good idea. You pass a bulletin nailed to the meeting house door, Court of Oyer and Terminer to convene. It sounds official, almost theatrical. And in a way it is. This court, assembled specifically to hear the witchcraft cases, becomes the stage upon which personal vengeance and mass hysteria can finally put on robes and call itself law. Inside the courthouse, things get strange quickly. The trials are like a play where no one's read the script, but the audience insists on clapping or fainting at all the right moments. You take a seat in the wooden gallery. The room smells of ink, sweat, and fear. A minister sits at the front, alongside the judges. Nearby, the afflicted girls twist and moan, dramatically reacting whenever the accused so much as breathes. One gasps and claims to see a yellow bird perched on the defendant's shoulder. Another screams, pointing to an invisible wound on her arm. The judges nod solemnly. This is spectral evidence, testimony of visions, dreams, or apparitions. In modern courts, it wouldn't stand a chance. But here in 1692, it's enough to condemn a person to the gallows. Quirky fact, spectral evidence was heavily debated at the time. Cotton Mather, yes, that Cotton Mather, cautioned against it, noting that even the devil could impersonate the innocent. But his father, Increase Mather, later tried to clean up the mess by saying it's better to let 10 guilty witches go than to kill one innocent soul. Unfortunately, by the time this logic took hold, the damage was already done. You watch as another trial unfolds. The accused barely speaks above a whisper. She swears she's innocent, that she's never even met the devil, let alone danced with him in the forest. But the girls begin howling again, clutching their stomachs, claiming they're being pricked by invisible pins. The judges furrow their brows. They ask the woman to recite the Lord's Prayer. She stumbles on a word. Suspicious. They note that she doesn't cry. Suspicious. They call a neighbor to testify. The neighbor once saw her walking alone near the woods. At dusk. Suspicious. By the end of the day, the jury delivers a verdict. Guilty. You slip out before sentencing, your hands cold and your heart colder. Justice here is not about evidence, it's about vibes. If the wrong person has a bad dream about you, you could wake up in jail. Outside the courthouse, the crowd lingers. Some cheer. Some weep. Most just mill about nervously, wondering if they've been noticed. Remember that time someone accused a dog? That wasn't an anomaly. One man, John Bradstreet, merely walked past the afflicted girls and was immediately accused of bewitching them with his glance. He fled to New York. Possibly the only time New York has ever seemed like a calm option. You pass a group of children drawing figures in the dust, stick figures with XS for eyes. They're giggling, but it doesn't sound playful. Even the games have absorbed the mood. As the sun dips lower, you find yourself back at the meeting house. A sermon is beginning. The minister speaks of God's justice, of Satan's cunning, of the purity of those who suffer to root out sin. He sounds tired. Or maybe just scared. Historians still argue how much of the clergy truly believed what they were preaching. Some seemed convinced. Others, like Reverend Hale, began to waver. Hale, who had originally championed the trials, would later recant, apologizing publicly for the role he played. You sit through the sermon anyway, because what else can you do? It's not like you can scroll Instagram. You shift on the wooden pew, counting knots in the grain, listening to the fire pop in the hearth behind the pulpit. The warmth feels nice, but it doesn't reach your spine. The congregation sings a psalm, slowly, in perfect unison. It echoes off the walls like a lamentation. You look around. Who's guilty? Who's next? Who's safe? In Salem, those are the only questions that matter. And they don't always have different answers. The next morning dawns cold and bright, almost insultingly so, given the mood. You walk the dirt road that leads from Salem village toward Gallows Hill, though no one dares call it that yet. They say the place or that ridge near the trees, as if avoiding the name might also avoid the hangings. But names aren't spells, and sunlight doesn't dispel fear, not here, not now. You pass a group of men raising a crude wooden platform. It looks like a harvest scaffold, something meant for bundles of wheat, not necks. The beams creak as they're fitted together. It's early June, and the ground is dry, which helps with footing. Someone mutters a joke about the devil preferring clear skies for execution days. No one laughs. Bridget Bishop, still in her russet shawl, becomes the first casualty. She walks calmly, they say. Doesn't beg. Doesn't curse. Doesn't faint. And when the noose is tightened and the cart kicked out from under her, the silence that follows is somehow louder than the crowd. Some call it justice. Others call it murder. Either way, it sets a precedent. You don't stick around long after. The energy near the scaffold is heavy, metallic. You head back toward town, thinking of what comes next, because in Salem, the wheels never stop once they've started turning. Soon, others are arrested. Sarah Good, Sarah Wilds, Rebecca Nurse. Names spoken in candlelit kitchens and muttered in dreams. The jails begin to fill. Most are makeshift, small wooden rooms, more like pens than cells. You peek into one as you pass and see a woman rocking back and forth on straw. She hums something soft and tuneless. Her dress is torn. Her hands shake. She's 19. Historians still argue whether the conditions in these jails worsen the outcomes. People died waiting for trial. One man, Roger Toothaker, died in custody before he could even be questioned. Another, Lydia Dustin, was declared innocent, after she had already perished behind bars. So much for justice. Back in the village, the atmosphere has curdled. People cross the street to avoid each other. Windows close faster. Neighbors refuse to lend sugar. A dropped needle in the lane is now a reason to accuse the woman who walked by it 10 minutes later. The paranoia has grown legs and is now doing laps around the town square. Even the ministers are uneasy. Reverend Hale, who once championed the process, begins to question it. You hear him speak with one of the judges in quiet tones, asking whether spectral evidence should truly outweigh character or witness. The judge, stern-faced, reminds him that the devil is crafty and that doubt is the devil's favorite tool. Hale doesn't argue, but you can see him exhale slowly, like someone trying to release a very old ghost. You stop by the tavern later, where the fire is warm and the ale is bitter. People whisper over their mugs, tracing connections between the accused. Did you know Sarah Good's child used to talk to an invisible friend? And wasn't Rebecca Nurse seen reading by candlelight alone? As if books after sundown might invite devils through the pages. One man claims he saw a rat leap from the shoulder of an accused woman and vanish into thin air. Another insists that a kettle boiled without a fire under it, proof apparently, that demons love tea. Quirky tidbit, during this time, the use of witch cakes became popular again. You take a moment to let that name sink in. A witch cake was made by baking rye meal mixed with the urine of an afflicted person, then feeding it to a dog. If the dog convulsed, the presence of witchcraft was confirmed. If it didn't, well, maybe it just had a strong stomach. Either way, that poor dog probably never looked at rye bread the same again. The afflicted girls become local celebrities of a sort. You see them strolling in small clusters, speaking in half-lowered voices, glancing meaningfully at those around them. They carry themselves with a nervous pride, like they're both victims and enforcers. Which, in some twisted way, they are. You overhear a merchant muttering under his breath, "Too much power in too few hands." He's careful to say it only once, and only near people he trusts. You nod, but say nothing. The town watch grows more present. Men in rough coats and wide-brimmed hats roam the streets at night, torches in hand, watching for suspicious activity. What that means depends on who's watching. A woman lingering outside after dark. A child speaking to herself. An old man with cloudy eyes who always did seem a little too fond of herbs. Sleep, already difficult in Salem, becomes a rare commodity. You lie on your pallet one night and hear distant sobbing. Another night, a sharp knock at the door, just someone checking, they say. No reason. Just checking. You start dreaming strange things. A cat with human hands. A burning tree that doesn't fall. Your name, whispered repeatedly in a language you don't know. You chalk it up to nerves, but you keep a sachet of lavender under your pillow anyway. That night, you pass by the meeting house and find Reverend Hale sitting alone on the steps. His head in his hands. His hat beside him. You don't speak, but he looks up briefly and meets your gaze. There's nothing accusatory in it. Just exhaustion. And something else. Something like guilt. Salem, it seems, is entering the fever stage. The part of the illness where the temperature spikes and people start seeing things that aren't there. Or perhaps, finally acknowledging what is. You wake before dawn, though you've barely slept. The rooster down the lane crows like he's announcing a battle, not a sunrise. You pull on your wool coat, it still smells faintly of wood smoke and damp leaves, and step into the quiet street. Mist curls along the ground like a nervous visitor. The town isn't stirring yet, but its tension is. Someone's chalked a crude symbol on the blacksmith's door. You pause. It looks like a trident, or maybe a pitchfork, or maybe just someone's idea of a warning. Symbols have started appearing everywhere lately. Stars. Circles. Eyes. Some are protective charms, others accusations, depending on who you ask. A painted horseshoe on a doorstep can either ward off evil or mark its lair. You walk past the home of Giles Corey. He's out front chopping wood. His movements are slow, deliberate, as if each swing is part protest, part ritual. He's in his 70s, and famously stubborn. People say he doesn't trust ministers or courts. He grunts a hello but doesn't stop working. You nod in return and keep walking, not entirely sure whether he nodded back. You hear later that Giles's refusal to plead, either guilty or not guilty, has stalled the court. He won't speak. He won't play their game. They can't proceed without a confession, and Giles knows it. A clever man, even if his strategy is more mule than legal scholar. Historians still argue whether his silence was noble defiance or bitter resignation. But either way, it frustrates the judges. So they turn to pressing, a medieval method of forcing speech. They lay him on the ground, place a wooden board over his chest, and begin piling stones. One by one. The weight grows. And still, Giles refuses. His only words? More weight. You try to picture this moment, and your brain scrambles, unable to decide whether to applaud or weep. The court sessions are now weekly entertainment. The meeting house fills with villagers, eager to witness trembling confessions, sudden fits, and solemn declarations. The accused are often too poor or too odd to be defended. A widow. A beggar. Someone who sells herbs from a basket. You sit in the back row once, half curious, half afraid. The air smells like old pine and sweaty fear. One woman, Martha Carrier, stands with her back straight and her chin up. She refuses to admit anything. Says the only devil here is in their imagination. She's quickly found guilty. You don't see her again. Another, George Burroughs, a former minister, is accused of superhuman strength and reciting the Lord's Prayer perfectly, apparently a suspicious move, as it's believed witches can't do that. Even his eloquence becomes evidence. You scribble a note to yourself, in Salem, proof of innocence may be proof of guilt. Quirky tidbit, at one point, a court official claimed to find a witch's teat on an accused man's body, a small blemish or mole, supposedly used by demons to suckle. This poor man's birthmark was given a new career in demon nursing. You can't help but picture a tiny horned imp with a bib. You hear whispers about touch tests too. If a victim of affliction is calmed by your touch, it confirms you as their tormentor. It's basically medieval hide and seek, but with higher stakes and worse prizes. You start to wonder if logic ever made a guest appearance at these trials, or if it's been tied up in someone's cellar since March. Reverend Hale grows more disillusioned by the day. He visits the accused in jail, brings them food, and speaks gently, like he's trying to undo what he helped begin. But the machine grinds on. The governor of Massachusetts, William Phips, eventually steps in, sort of. He creates a special court, the Court of Oyer and Terminer. Its goal is to clear the backlog. You know, like it's a bakery line instead of a line of people facing execution. It sounds official, but really it just fast-tracks the condemnations. You wonder if anyone names their children Oyer after this. Hopefully not. More names are added. The accusations pick up speed, like a wheel that forgot how to stop. Some people accuse their own neighbors. Others accuse enemies. One girl even accuses a dead woman. You wonder how the court handled that. Did they dig her up for questioning? The prisons overflow. The town stinks of unwashed clothes, candle wax, and fierce sweat. And still, the accusations come. You visit one prisoner who swears she's innocent, then admits to using a little folk remedy once involving dandelion tea and a prayer. You ask if that's really witchcraft. She shrugs and says only if it works. Her smile is dry and tired. Spectral evidence continues to dominate the trials, ghostly visions, invisible claws, unseen forces. The kind of proof you can't touch, measure, or even debate. It's like trying to argue with fog. You begin to understand why the town feels permanently unsettled. Nothing is grounded. Truth is vaporous. One night, while walking home past the tavern, you hear a drunk man shout, "Maybe the devil's not in the women, but in the men who see him everywhere." Someone throws a mug at him, but he ducks. You remember his face. He'll be accused within the week. That's how the pattern goes. Speak out, get named. Stay silent, still get named. You begin to wonder if the safest thing to do is take up mime. And all the while, the sun keeps rising. The chickens still lay eggs. Children still play, though their games now involve mock trials and make-believe spells. You pass one group shouting, "I saw your spirit pinch me," and can't tell if it's parody or practice. You sigh. This is Salem now. A town where silence can get you crushed, words can get you hanged, and sneezing at the wrong time might start a new trial. You start marking days by the number of people in shackles. At first, it was a handful. Then it was a dozen. Now, it's hard to tell whether the jailhouses or the meeting house is fuller. They've had to open new holding spaces, converted barns, even the lower rooms of private homes, to accommodate the growing population of the accused. Some call it necessary. Others just call it crowded. You pass by the jail one morning, the kind with thick iron bars and a door that groans like it regrets its job. You catch a glimpse inside, thin cots, straw pallets, walls that sweat in the heat and freeze in the cold. A woman inside cups her hands over her mouth and sings a hymn. Her voice is steady. No one joins in. This week's hangings are scheduled for Thursday. That's how people say it now, scheduled, like they're talking about a town fair or a church bake sale. 5 names are written on the board in the meeting house vestibule. It's posted right above the hymnals. You try not to stare too long. They've built the gallows on Gallows Hill, a high, scrubby knoll on the edge of town. It's mostly barren save for a few stubborn patches of grass and one sad, half-dead tree that looks like it wants no part in anything. That tree becomes something of a witness, mute, immobile, and enduring. The hangman doesn't speak much either. He just does his work, quick and quiet. The rope is hemp. Imported, oddly enough, from England. There's something about being hanged with foreign twine that feels unnecessarily ironic. Historians still argue whether the town watched these executions with solemnity, excitement, or something stranger, an eerie, performative grief. Some reports suggest the crowds were silent. Others say there were cheers. The truth, likely, sits somewhere uneasily in between. You find yourself trying to picture what justice even looks like in a place like this. A courtroom filled with weeping girls. Judges who frown thoughtfully at invisible evidence. Ministers pacing like philosophers who lost the plot somewhere in the middle. And of course, the accused, ragged, confused, or simply resigned. It's hard to find the villain in a story where everyone seems equally terrified. Quirky tidbit: one judge, Sir William Stoughton, was reportedly so stern he once sentenced someone without looking up from his tea. Whether this is an exaggeration or just colonial multitasking is up for debate. Reverend Hale, meanwhile, continues his slide into disillusionment. He begins to protest the use of spectral evidence, argues for mercy, even pens letters to higher authorities asking for intervention. It's like watching someone try to reverse a landslide with a dinner spoon. You attend a sermon hoping for clarity. Instead, the preacher shouts about the devil's army. He says the war isn't out there, it's here, in Salem, in your homes, in your thoughts. The congregation shivers. Some weep. One woman faints. You wonder how many people come to church for absolution, and how many just want to not be noticed. A neighbor confesses to you in a whisper, she once had a dream about a black dog with red eyes. She hasn't told anyone else. Not even her husband. She begs you to forget it. You try, but it lingers. Even dreams aren't safe here. At home, you boil a pot of tea and sit by the fire, trying to feel normal. The flames crackle like they're gossiping. You watch the shadows dance and wonder how long it'll be before someone accuses a fireplace of consorting with Satan. Honestly, you believe it? Children's rhymes shift. Now they chant things like witch, hide your mark, the devil's near and dogs will bark. You pretend not to hear. The community is fraying. Neighbors stop visiting. Friendly nods turn into cautious glances. If your bread burns, it's suspicious. If your cow stops giving milk, it's more suspicious. If you sneeze 3 times before breakfast, someone calls the constable. Even nature starts feeling implicated. There are reports of cats acting strangely. A dog is executed, yes, executed, for affliction. You didn't think dogs could be subpoenaed, but here we are. The poor creature howled at the wrong time, and now it's part of the growing graveyard of scapegoats. You begin to carry lavender in your pockets, not because it wards off evil, though some say it does, but because the scent reminds you of less complicated seasons. You take long walks by the edge of town, near the marshes, where frogs chirp indifferently and the wind doesn't whisper accusations. One morning you find a copy of Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, sitting on a table in the meeting house. It's been imported from Europe, dog-eared and annotated by someone who underlines with particular enthusiasm. The book is dense and disturbing. It claims that witches can steal men's virility, fly without wings, and curse butter churns. You read it for a few minutes, then decide your brain deserves better and go stare at a wall instead. The irony? While all this witch hunting is going on, the crops are actually decent. Rain's been steady, the harvest looks promising, and the birds haven't flown into any windows lately. But no one's in the mood to notice. It's hard to appreciate a good pumpkin when your neighbors are being marched to the gallows. Even the weather seems to hold its breath. The skies stay gray. The air carries that restless stillness that precedes a thunderstorm, even when none comes. It's like the whole town is waiting for something to give, something unseen, or perhaps just inconveniently invisible, like reason, You sit on your porch that evening, sipping tea and counting clouds. A woman walks past, eyes cast low, arms tucked close. You don't know her name. But she doesn't look at you. And you don't say hello? Not out of malice. Just caution. The list of names grows longer than the list of crimes. You wake to a new pamphlet slipped under your door, an open letter from the ministers of Boston, cautioning against overzealousness in the use of spectral evidence. It's been passed around town like a secret, and debated in hushed tones behind drawn curtains. Some say it's a lifeline. Others call it meddling. The truth probably depends on whether you're currently being accused. By now, the town's pulse beats to the rhythm of rumors. Every creak in the rafters becomes a whispered confession. Every misplaced sock is a satanic omen. A child claims a man turned into a yellow bird. A woman insists her bed levitated. One poor soul wakes up to find their pie has collapsed in the oven, which is, apparently, all the proof needed that their neighbor is in league with Beelzebub. You trudge past the courthouse, where the accused wait in queues, clutching shawls and dignity in equal measure. Some try to smile. Most don't bother anymore. Inside, the magistrates barely pause for breath. The docket is packed. Justice now moves with conveyor belt efficiency. Accuse, arrest, examine, imprison, repeat. You duck into the meeting house for warmth. It smells like damp wool and moral panic. A boy is sweeping the floor, muttering to himself. On the wall, someone has posted the names of those executed so far. You count 19. 19 people who once went to market, brushed their teeth, worried about taxes, now just ink on parchment. A note beside the list says, "May God have mercy." It doesn't say on whom. Historians still argue whether this phase of the trials marked peak hysteria or just the beginning of burnout. There's evidence of both, growing skepticism, yes, but also more elaborate accusations. One girl swears she saw witches dancing in a meadow under the moon, wearing blue sashes and singing off-key. Someone else reports a spectral pig speaking Latin. Nobody asks how she knew it was Latin. And yet there are signs the fervor is, if not cooling, then at least wobbling. Reverend Hale has now fully crossed over into Team Regret. He visits the jails regularly, offers prayers, and tries to petition the court for clemency. His transformation from confident authority to apologetic spectator is both tragic and slightly inspiring. You watch him one afternoon as he presses his palm against a jail cell door and closes his eyes. For a moment, he looks like a man trying to will the whole town back into sanity. In contrast, Judge Stoughton seems to have doubled down. He now insists that questioning the verdicts is equivalent to blasphemy. You suspect that if he ever does repent, it will be on his deathbed, and even then, he'll probably demand notarized proof that God exists before admitting he was wrong. The gallows see more visitors now. Not spectators, protesters. Small groups who whisper prayers for the condemned, or leave tokens, sprigs of rosemary, folded scraps of psalm verses, the occasional crude wooden cross. Someone scrawls "Peace be upon her" into the bark of the gallows tree. You notice the town constable trying to scrape it off. He doesn't quite finish. Quirky Tidbit, a traveling herbalist, passes through town, selling witch-proof balm made of rosemary, beeswax, and aniseed. It smells pleasant but does absolutely nothing, which, to be fair, makes it no worse than the trials themselves. You visit the jail one morning with a basket of food, bread, cheese, dried apples. It's allowed, so long as you don't try to sneak in a file or a book of heretical theology. The jailer is a man with weary eyes and a nose like a ladle. He shrugs at your offering, then gestures you toward the cells. You speak briefly with an older woman accused of sending her specter to pinch a neighbor's baby. She says she hasn't left her bed in weeks and asks you, gently, whether babies often lie. You don't know how to answer, so you give her an extra apple. As you leave, you catch a scrap of a lullaby being sung from another cell. It's in a language you don't recognize. You pause for a moment, then move on. It feels too intimate to intrude. More and more, people begin wondering what it'll take to stop all this. Some say the governor might intervene. Others hope for a sign from heaven, an eclipse perhaps, or a talking cow with strong opinions. The more reasonable among them pin their hopes on paperwork. And then, one morning, a letter arrives from Boston. Governor Phipps, who has been off fighting France or arguing with Frenchmen or doing something vaguely colonial, has returned. And he's heard about the trials. All of it. The spectral pigs. The teenage theatrics. The death toll. The speaking puppets incident that probably deserves a documentary of its own. He's not impressed. In a single stroke, he orders the dissolution of the Court of Oyer and Terminer, the tribunal responsible for the trials. New trials are to be conducted, he says, but without spectral evidence, without hysteria, without the gleeful pace of execution. It's not a miracle, but it is something. You hear the news from a boy running through town with ink-stained fingers and a grin so wide it looks borrowed from someone else. People gather in small groups, murmuring, blinking, unsure whether to believe it. You overhear one man say, "Well, thank God," followed by, "Though it's a bit late for my sister." Still, relief has a flavor. It tastes like fresh bread. Like rain after drought. Like silence when you've had too many sermons. That night you light a candle and sit by the window. For the first time in weeks, the shadows feel like shadows again, not accusations. The trees don't lean quite so suspiciously. The wind just sighs instead of hissing. You don't sleep, not yet. But you breathe. And it's enough. You wake to a town that's holding its breath. No new arrests today. No shrieking fits. No black cats inexplicably appearing at windowsills. It's quiet, unsettlingly so, like the day after a storm when everyone's afraid to look at what's left standing. You walk down the main street and notice how people avoid each other's eyes. The grocer offers you a loaf of bread with a small, awkward nod. The cobbler has turned his sign to close but still sits inside, polishing a shoe that doesn't seem to belong to anyone. The jails are still full, of course. Just because the Court of Oyer and Terminer has been dissolved doesn't mean the accused get to go home. There are bureaucracies to untangle, affidavits to unroll, and at least 4 magistrates who insist on reviewing everything 3 times. But there's hope now, a thin, rattling hope like a loose shutter tapping in the breeze. You pass a group of girls who had once been the star witnesses. They're sitting on the steps of the meeting house, not quite sure whether to keep pretending or quietly dissolve back into anonymity. One chews on a ribbon. Another stares at her boots. Nobody is pretending to be possessed. Historians still argue whether these girls truly believed in their visions or simply got swept up in something larger than themselves. Some say it was hysteria. Others call it groupthink. One fringe theory even suggests ergot poisoning from contaminated rye. Whatever the cause, the spell is breaking now, and the performers have forgotten their lines. There's a cart unloading in front of the jail, a load of fresh straw for bedding and a barrel of dried peas. You help the driver, more out of boredom than compassion. He tells you, quietly, that his cousin was accused but not taken. She saw the tide turn just in time, he says. Stopped crying fits, stopped shouting about cats. Got quiet and went to church. Smart cousin. Quirky tidbit. A local woman has begun selling amulets of official sanity made from twine, dried thyme, and a wax seal pressed with the governor's initials. They're utterly useless, but oddly reassuring. You buy one and slip it into your coat pocket. Just in case. The clergy have also taken a more somber tone. Reverend Paris, who arguably helped start the whole mess, now preaches with the energy of a man trying to win back a disappointed audience. His sermons emphasize forgiveness, introspection, and something he keeps calling communal humility, which sounds suspiciously like an apology without the actual apology part. You sit through one of his sermons, mostly because you're curious. The church feels different now. Less like a furnace, more like a cellar. Cool. Quiet. Cautious. Midway through the service, a child sneezes and everyone flinches. Still, people are trying. That counts for something. There's a growing movement to formally pardon the accused, or at least to release them. But paperwork moves slowly, and jails aren't built for nuance. You visit again, basket in hand. The jailer recognizes you now. He even smiles slightly. He tells you that some prisoners have been moved to the top floor, where the windows open and the rats are fewer. Progress. Inside, you meet a young woman who was accused of enchanting a neighbor's cow. She says the cow just didn't like the neighbor and has no opinion on witchcraft. She laughs as she says this, then pauses, as if unsure whether she's allowed to laugh yet. You offer her a slice of dried pear. She accepts with both hands. "Do you think they'll let us out soon?" she asks. You nod. Because you have to believe that. Even if the town isn't fully healed yet, there are signs of softening. Families begin speaking again. Neighbors share loaves without suspicion. A child leaves a drawing of a heart on the meeting house steps. 2 stick figures holding hands beneath a very wobbly sun. It's charming, if slightly anatomically incorrect. And the accused? They begin to write letters. Petitions. Quiet essays in shaky script, asking for reconsideration, for clemency, for acknowledgement. Some are addressed to the governor. Some to God. One simply reads, "Please let me go home." You help deliver one of these letters. You tuck it into your coat, past the amulet, and walk it to a scribe in Boston. The journey takes all day. The sky grows silver with cloud, and your shoes fill with dust. The scribe doesn't look up when you hand it over, just nods and drops it in a wooden tray. You wonder if that's how redemption always begins. With a letter. A walk. A sigh. On your way back, you stop in a tavern for broth and bread. There's a man there reading a list of the accused aloud to his tablemates. He doesn't sneer. Doesn't shout. Just reads. When he finishes, he says, "We owe them peace." One of the others clinks his mug and says, "And maybe some land." Everyone laughs. But it's a soft laugh. Almost gentle. The town sleeps better that night. Or tries to. There are fewer candlelit windows. Fewer prayers whispered into pillows. Even the night air feels calmer, like the land itself is exhaling. You still don't dream. Or if you do, you don't remember. But you wake without dread. And that's a start. The calendar flips again. You don't remember flipping it. Maybe someone else did. But the days are getting longer now, and the air smells faintly of thawing soil and leftover soot. Salem Village wears its winter coat a bit loosely now, like someone half-heartedly trying to leave a party but still holding their drink. You walk past patches of slushy earth where snow has given up and puddles have taken its place. Outside the meeting house, someone's posted a new notice. You lean in close. It's another petition, this one signed by several townsfolk calling for the full release of all those still imprisoned. Their argument is simple. Too many innocent people have suffered for too long. A good point, made without excessive flourishes. Not everyone agrees, of course. You overhear a man at the blacksmith's mutter that letting them all out sets a dangerous precedent. You're not sure what kind of precedent he means, but the horse he's shoeing looks more reasonable than he does. Historians still argue whether public opinion truly shifted out of compassion, or simply out of exhaustion. The trials dragged on for so long, disrupted so many lives, that some residents just wanted to move on. Others, though, had genuinely begun to doubt the spectral evidence, the dubious confessions, the children's strange performances. And then there were the pragmatists. The ones who realized that a community constantly eating itself was not, strictly speaking, sustainable. One quirky solution was proposed by a farmer who suggested appointing a town skeptic, someone whose only job would be to doubt every new accusation. He even volunteered, noting that he'd been unconvinced by everything since 1682. It didn't catch on, but you admire the spirit. At home, your neighbor, Mrs. Cray, invites you for tea. This is unusual. You once suspected her of hexing your tomato plants, though in retrospect, they probably just hated clay soil and neglect. She serves you boiled root vegetables and an herbal brew that tastes faintly of pine needles and regret. Over tea, she confesses she once worried she might be accused. "I had a dream once," she whispers, "that I flew. Woke up with my arms outstretched and a breeze in the kitchen." You ask if it was just a breeze through the window. "No," she says, "it was definitely the stove flue." But for a second, it felt real. You both sip in silence. It's these moments, strange, quiet, deeply human, that begin knitting Salem back together. Not the laws, not the proclamations, but the little acts: a borrowed teacup returned, a shared story, a porch swept without being asked. You pass the jail again on your way to the well. Fewer guards now. More sunlight on the windows. One woman has been released, and she stands in the doorway like someone adjusting to gravity again. Her shoes are too big, lone probably, but she walks like someone newly stitched back together. You wave. She waves back. It's enough. There's talk of reparations now. That word hasn't been used yet. It sounds too modern, too financial, but the idea is floating through the town like early pollen. Some suggest returning land. Others whisper about money, apologies, handwritten notes. Governor Phipps writes something vaguely remorseful. Ministers begin to shift in their sermons, emphasizing mercy over vengeance, community over fear. None of it happens quickly. None of it is perfect. But it happens. The afflicted girls have scattered. A few remain, eyes down, voices small. One now sells ribbon at the market and won't look you in the eye. Another left town entirely. You've heard she married a tanner in Gloucester. Started fresh. Who could blame her? One peculiar thing: the phrase bewitching hour has begun to mean something different. No longer just about witchcraft or midnight spirits. Now it's used sarcastically. Someone misplaces their butter? Must be the bewitching hour. Someone forgets their prayer book? Same. The town is slowly, awkwardly reclaiming its humor. You run into a boy chasing a hoop down the muddy lane. He wears a red scarf and nearly bowls you over. When he stops to apologize, you see that he's humming a tune, one of those little nursery songs that once would have been called devilish. Now it just sounds like a child being alive. You take a different route home today, past the cemetery. Some of the families of the accused have started placing flowers near the unmarked graves. Nothing extravagant, just small bundles of dried rosemary or sprigs of wintergreen. You kneel beside one and add a pebble from your pocket. It's something you read about once, a way to say, I remember. The air shifts. It's not warmer, exactly. Just kinder. At the edge of the village, a new sign is being posted near the school. It's a set of rules, some dull, some obvious. No accusations shall be entertained without physical evidence. No testimony from the spectral or invisible shall be admissible. You smirk. It sounds absurd. And necessary. That night you sit at your window and watch the town settle into its dusk rhythms. A woman lights a lamp. A dog barks at nothing. Somewhere, someone plays a tin whistle badly and cheerfully. You press your hand to the glass. You still don't know why it all happened. Not really. Was it fear? Boredom? Moldy rye? A spiritual fever? Historians still argue whether Salem's descent was inevitable, or whether it might have been stopped with one brave voice early on, saying, enough. Either way, it's ending now. And you were here to see it. The spring rain arrives quietly, slipping in overnight, and turning Salem's dirt lanes into soft ribbons of mud. You wake to the sound of it tapping the roof, steady, polite, as though it's asking permission to cleanse the town. Outside, the trees wear a misty veil, and the air smells faintly of moss and damp wool. You step into your boots, which are somehow always colder than expected, and walk down the path to the well. Along the way, you pass the meeting house, its windows slightly fogged, as if it, too, is still waking up from a long, unsettling dream. There's no sermon today, just a gathering of townsfolk arranging new benches and scraping old wax from the floorboards. A quiet kind of atonement. You offer to help. Someone hands you a cloth. While you rub beeswax into the wood, the talk is softer than it used to be. Less judgmental. Less eager. There's something gentle in the way people speak now, like they're still afraid of cracking the silence too hard. You nod along, even when you don't follow the conversation. It's not about what's said anymore, it's about showing up. One of the ministers reads a passage from the book of Job, not the part with all the bad luck, but a softer section, something about humility and restoration. The words don't ring with fire and brimstone anymore. They land like a quilt, heavy, but warm. A boy hands you a candle stub from under the pews. You take it like it's a relic. In a way, it is. Outside, a fresh notice flutters on the message board: prayer service for peace and forgiveness. It's scheduled for Sunday evening, and though the lettering is modest, someone added a small flower pressed into the corner. A wild violet, probably. The kind that insists on blooming even in stubborn soil. You read the names listed underneath, some familiar, some unexpected. A few that once signed the accusations. A few that once sat in jail. The lines between guilt and grief blur a little more each day. Historians still argue whether forgiveness was ever fully possible in Salem, or whether the scars simply learned to wear lace collars. Records suggest that while public apologies were made, private reconciliation came in smaller, quieter forms: a meal shared, a fence mended, a hand offered on a walk home. That's the kind of history no one documents but everyone feels. One fringe detail from the aftermath: a woman in Marblehead, hearing about the pardons, declared herself the last unaccused witch in Essex County and offered protective charms for sale, 3d apiece. Business was surprisingly brisk. You suspect people weren't quite done with superstition. They just preferred it neatly packaged with a ribbon. You walk home past Mrs. Cray's house again. The curtains twitch as you go by, and a moment later the door opens. She calls your name, just once, and you pause. "I bake too many oat cakes," she says, "and I dislike waste." You accept. They're dry, slightly oversalted, and taste of time, but something about eating them on her porch feels like progress. She tells you her cousin in Andover once kept a dream journal to avoid midnight disturbances. Each morning, he'd write down whatever strange wanderings he remembered. She says the worst one was about a dancing badger. No witches, just peculiar wildlife. You laugh, and she doesn't shush you. At home, you set the oat cakes on your windowsill and listen to the drip of rain off the eaves. It's rhythmic, like a clock that doesn't care about time. Your journal lies open, and you wonder if you should start recording your own dreams. Not to prevent accusations or purge demons, just to remember things more kindly. You jot one sentence: "I dreamed of a town where forgiveness grew like moss." In the town square, someone started a new record book. Not of land deeds or births, but of retractions. Individuals come forward, sometimes publicly, more often in private, and amend their earlier claims. It's slow, awkward, necessary. One page simply reads, "I believed what I shouldn't have. I am sorry." It's not literature, but it's honest. And not everyone participates. Some people still mutter about God's justice or hidden devilry. You let them be. They're quieter now, their voices drowned out by the sound of fence hammers, garden spades, and infants learning to squeal in spring air. You walk past the old whipping post. It hasn't been used in months. Someone's tied a scarf around it, faded blue with a snagged corner. You don't know what it means, but it feels like a truce. That evening, during supper, the fire crackles comfortably and the bread rises as it should. You catch yourself humming a tune you used to hum before everything went strange. It takes a minute to remember the words. Something about harvests and feather beds. It feels like a spell, not the kind Salem once feared, but the kind it might have needed all along. In bed, the rain still taps the window. You pull the blanket up to your chin and think about the meeting house benches, the forgiveness service, and Mrs. Cray's awkward hospitality. You're not sure if Salem has found peace. But tonight, at least, you've found a little. The next morning brings birdsong, faint, persistent, and determined to remind you that the world still turns, no matter how many court documents get burned or how many apologies go half-said. The air is brisk, tinged with chimney smoke and the clatter of someone trying to fix a broken cart axle. Salem is stirring again, one humble task at a time. You tie your cloak, still a bit damp from yesterday's rain, and head toward the records hall. Not the courtroom, not anymore. That place has been shut for a while now. Today, you're going somewhere quieter. Somewhere the ink flows slower. Inside the records office, the shelves smell like wax and old regrets. You nod to Mr. Grindle, who now insists on being called Archivist Grindle, as though rebranding himself will erase the months he spent copying confession statements in a font slightly too cheerful. He's still here, though, still preserving, sorting, quietly rewriting the town's collective memory. He beckons you to a desk already set up with parchment, sand shaker, and quill. Apparently you're here to help. You dip the quill into ink the exact color of a healing bruise and begin copying names, not the accused this time, but the names of those who recanted. A new list. A new beginning. Outside, children run past the window, chasing a hoop with sticks and shouting nonsense about sea monsters in the well. You watch them for a moment, struck by how quickly children return to pretending once the grown-ups stop giving them real nightmares. Archivist Grindle sighs. These lists won't make it right, he says, but they may stop it from getting worse. You nod. And keep writing. Historians still argue whether these post-trial documents were attempts at transparency, or just a very organized form of collective denial. Some argue the records were crafted to control the narrative, proof that Salem repented properly. Others believe they were meant for future generations, so they know exactly where things went sideways. You pause at one name, Rebecca Nurse. There's a small star next to hers. Grindle explains that it indicates a formal pardon granted by the Massachusetts General Court decades later. Posthumous, of course. As most apologies tend to be. In a drawer beneath the main ledger, you find a bundle of dried herbs tied with twine. Mugwort and lavender, mostly. You raise an eyebrow. For the headaches, Grindle mumbles, not meeting your gaze. You tuck the bundle into your pocket anyway. It smells like dreams remembered too late. One quirky postscript. For a few years after the trials, Salem's public gatherings avoided using the word witch altogether. It became the town's accidental swear word. Instead, people said things like the unfortunate matter or that summer, or just cleared their throat dramatically and changed the subject. Still, the silence had shape. The absence was its own kind of presence. You continue copying names. One belongs to a man who confessed only because he was promised a lesser punishment. He recanted later, quietly, in a journal that his granddaughter would eventually donate to a local school. You wonder if he ever slept soundly again. You wonder if that even mattered. Grindle hands you a fresh sheet. This one's for the accused who were never tried, he says. You blink. There were more? Oh yes, he says, but the storm ended before it got to all of them. The list is short but sobering. You copy it with care, each letter a kind of prayer against repetition. You take your lunch by the river, bread, cheese, and a pear that might be past its prime but still manages to taste faintly like sunlight. You sit on a flat rock and watch the water drag sticks and petals downstream. It looks like it knows where it's going. You envy that. Across the way, a group of young women walk together, skirts rustling, heads tilted toward one another. They're laughing. Not cruelly. Just laughing. A sound you didn't realize you missed until now. One is tossing pebbles into the river and muttering what sounds like rhymes. Protection charms, perhaps. Or idle fancies. You don't interrupt. Some rituals, even unspoken ones, deserve their space. When you return to the office, Grindle is gone. But a note waits on your desk. Good work. Please return tomorrow. Bring more ink. Also cake? You smile. Not because it's funny, but because it's human. You walk back through town with that slow, deliberate pace people use when they don't want the day to end. The cobblestones feel warmer somehow. The house is less accusatory. You wave to Mrs. Cray again. This time, she waves back. You think about how much has changed, and how much hasn't. The old fears still lurk. They've just learned to whisper. But there's comfort in small routines. In hand-copied records and half-rotten pears. In quiet apologies and public cakes. In walking the same path twice and noticing it feels softer the second time. At home, you light a candle and reread the names you copied. You don't say them aloud. That would be too much. Instead, you let the flicker of flame do the remembering for you. You write your own name at the bottom of the page, not because you're guilty, but because you lived through it. Because someone should say, I was there. Even if it's just for the record. Your feet carry you home by habit, not urgency. There's no fire waiting. No trial. Just a room with shutters that creak in the wind and a bed that's seen better stuffing. The candle you lit earlier has burned halfway down, wax pooling like a slow, quiet sigh. You leave it. Tonight, even flame deserves to wander. Upstairs, you open a chest. Inside, a few folded linens, a cracked mirror, and a letter you've read enough times to know by heart. It's from someone who left town right before the worst of it hit, a cousin, or a friend, depending on how loosely you interpret family. The letter says they heard about Salem from a man who heard it in a tavern, and they hoped you were safe. That's all. Just hoped. You wish they'd asked more? Downstairs again, you make tea. Not the strong kind. Just steeped mint, barely warm. You sip slowly, feeling each swallow trace a line of calm down your throat. There's a knock at the door, but you don't rush. No one knocks with urgency anymore. That era ended with the gavel. It's a boy, barefoot, red-cheeked, and holding a stack of parchment tied with string. He thrusts it at you like it might bite. From Grindle, he mumbles. Said you'd know what to do? You do. Inside the bundle, more names. More corrections. More crossed-out confessions with false scrawled beside them in a firmer hand than you expected. At the bottom, a curious addition. We should start listing the living. You frown, reread, nod. Because that's something nobody's catalogued yet. Not the accusers or the accused, but the survivors. The ones who kept shops running and made soup for the sick and slipped apology notes into bread loaves. The ones who whispered she wasn't a witch, even if only to their cats. You set the bundle down, stoke the fire, and pull a stool closer. This part won't be neat. No one agrees on who counts as a survivor. Was it just the people who didn't die? Or does it include those who recanted? Those who regretted their silence? Those who quietly helped another family escape? Historians still argue whether survival, in Salem's case, meant complicity or courage. Whether keeping your head down was self-preservation, or silent endorsement. Whether being afraid excused doing nothing. You decide the list should be long. Generous. You include people who looked away but later wept. You include a baker who slipped pastries to a jailed neighbor. You include Grindle, obviously, though you write begrudgingly helpful next to his name. You stop to sharpen your quill. It's slower work than copying, this inventing of a new kind of record. There are no templates. No checkboxes. Just instinct. You include yourself, with a question mark. Outside, the town is quiet again. But not the brittle quiet of fear, this one's softer, more like a pause between lines of music. You glance at the names on your list. Some are old, some are barely more than children. All of them stayed. You remember one of the oddest entries in the court records. A chicken was put forward as evidence. Not because it spoke, though that would have been impressive, but because it laid an egg shaped like a finger. Devilish, someone muttered. Peculiar, someone else offered. No one asked the chicken? That's the thing about Salem. Everything was a symbol. A freckle. A dream. A loud sneeze in church. Each sign got translated, twisted, misfiled under witchcraft, and handed back like a guilty verdict in disguise. You sigh. Fold your latest list. Tie it with twine. Then, before bed, you check the corners of your room. Not out of superstition, but habit. Some patterns take longer to unlearn. In the fireplace, the embers blink like sleepy eyes. You watch them until your own grow heavy. And when you finally sleep, it's without dreams. Not because you're peaceful, but because you're tired of symbols. Across town, in the attic of the records office, Grindle has started a new shelf. He labels it Other Truths. It's mostly blank. But that's the point. Blank space, after all, is where new stories begin. You drift deeper, your breath sinking with the rhythm of a town that's trying, not perfectly, but sincerely, to heal. The morning light arrives reluctantly, creeping through your window in thin, gray ribbons that hesitate before crossing the floorboards. Outside, a rooster crows late. Perhaps he too has grown wary of declaring anything too early. You stretch slowly, spine crackling like a fire rekindled after too long a silence, and pad barefoot across the room. There's bread left from yesterday, a bit tough but still willing to soften with enough butter and patience. You slice it carefully, your mind already floating to what today might hold. Not a trial, not a hanging, not a hurried scribble of guilt or protest, but perhaps just some quiet sorting. Paperwork and memory. You head to the meeting house, now turned makeshift records hall. The front door groans when opened, announcing your arrival to the dust motes and crooked sunlight inside. Grindle's already there, of course, he's always there, surrounded by ledgers stacked like fortress walls. He looks up, eyes red-rimmed from too little sleep or too much scrutiny, and gestures toward the far table. They're starting to ask questions, he says, as if this is both good news and a threat. About restitution. About who should apologize to whom. About fixing things. You nod and sit. That sounds suspiciously like progress, and as with most forms of progress in Puritan New England, it's arriving tangled in guilt and bureaucracy. Your first task today is the apologies. Not the official ones, that would require ministers and magistrates and a printing press, but the small, personal ones. The kind whispered between fence posts. You begin sorting the pile. There's one from a man who watched his niece testify against a neighbor and said nothing. He writes, "I thought she would falter. She didn't. I did." You place that one in the sincere pile. Another comes from a woman who claimed a specter slapped her in her sleep. She writes that she's not sure anymore. That the slap might have just been the wind. You smile faintly. The wind has taken the blame for many things. Historians still argue whether these small apologies ever made a difference, or if they were too late to be meaningful. Some say they were performative, meant to soothe reputations rather than wounds. Others believe they were all people had left, once the gallows were dismantled and silence proved too loud to bear. You aren't sure. But you catalog them anyway. Outside, children play again. Their shrieks are joyous now, not panicked. One game involves drawing pentagrams in the dirt with sticks. You assume their parents wouldn't approve, but the kids seem mostly interested in geometric symmetry. No curses, just careful lines. Back at the desk, Grindle pulls out a document he's been hesitant to show you. It's from the governor. An early draft of something that might one day be called a pardon, but it reads more like an awkward shrug. You skim the text. It's filled with phrases like misguided fervor and tragic misjudgments. No names. No blame. Just a misty attempt at closure. Grindle mutters it's a start. You say nothing. Sometimes, not responding is a form of agreement. Or at least, an invitation to try again. Across the room, a woman sorts clothing left behind by the accused. Shawls. Bonnets. A pair of boots with hand-stitched initials. She's tasked with returning them to families. Or, if no one wants them, storing them as evidence of a world gone sideways. You watch her work for a moment. It feels holy, in a domestic kind of way. You remember something odd. One accused woman had a pet squirrel. Not a black cat, not a toad, but a squirrel named Button. The townsfolk were horrified. Squirrels weren't domesticated. They were wild, twitchy, prone to biting. Obviously demonic. The woman insisted Button liked raisins and gentle head scratches. You wonder what became of him. These are the details you try not to forget. The squirrel. The embroidery pattern on a condemned man's cuffs. The way one girl fainted every time anyone mentioned butter churns. None of it made sense. But that never stopped anyone from nodding solemnly and saying, which? You finish the morning's list and stretch. Your back protests, and so does Grindle's. The two of you share a companionable groan, the kind that bonds more than any shared secret. Lunch? He asks. You decline. You've got an errand instead. Not far, just a short walk down to the cemetery, where a few of the accused now rest under stones that say very little. You carry a sprig of rosemary in your coat pocket. It's not for mourning. It's for memory. At the graveyard, the wind is gentler than expected. There are birds here now. Brave ones. You crouch near a weather-worn marker and leave the rosemary. No speech. Just breath, and the creak of nearby tree limbs shifting like old men at a pew. You head back before the air turns sharp. Autumn's creeping in early this year. There's a bite behind the breeze. But for once, it doesn't feel like an omen. Back inside, the meeting house feels warmer. Maybe it's the tea someone left on the stove. Maybe it's that the walls now contain less fear, and more ink. You return to the desk and open your ledger. Let's start listing the ones who changed their minds, you say softly. Grindle looks up. He doesn't argue. You write. Mary W., confessed, recanted, now knits for orphan girls. Thomas G., was silent during the trials, now reads testimony aloud to visitors. And P., still believes in witches, but thinks we found none here. Your pen scratches steadily. And through it all, you feel it, the long, slow exhale of a town learning to live with its memory. The sound of quills on parchment fills the room like slow rain on thatched roofs. You and Grindle keep writing. It's not glamorous, and it's certainly not fast, but there's something comforting about the rhythm. Names, details, footnotes, everything gets its own moment on the page. A town that once accused now learns to annotate. You're building a different kind of history now. Not the courtroom transcripts, those already exist, grim and methodical. This is a social record. The people who offered apologies, the families who moved away, the ones who stayed and planted herbs where gallows once cast their shadows. You write of one elderly man who tends a garden full of mint, thyme, and pennyroyal in silence. His daughter was accused. Didn't make it to trial. A sudden illness, they said. He doesn't speak of it, but every August he leaves dried sprigs on the meeting house doorstep. That's worth recording. Historians still argue whether this late reckoning counts as justice, or simply delay. Some say it proves the resilience of communities. Others believe it was just a way to ease the collective conscience before winter. You lean more toward the former, but ask again on a foggy day and your answer might shift. A soft knock interrupts the scribbling. A girl stands in the doorway, barely 12, with a ribbon too large for her braid and a stack of folded papers in her arms. These are from my teacher, she says. He wants them added. Grindle takes them, scans the first sheet, and lets out a dry little laugh. New theories, he mutters. About the fits. Mercury in the well water this time. You raise an eyebrow. More likely than devils? He shrugs. Depends which day you asked me. The papers go in a growing pile labeled Physiological Explanations. You've seen other ones, moldy rye, carbon monoxide, even neurological tics mistaken for curses. The stack is getting taller. Comfortingly so. That's the thing about hindsight, it grows like ivy. Starts small, wrapping gently around the past. Then tightens, redefines. The girl lingers. Is it true, she asks, that someone barked like a dog and no one found it strange? You glance at Grindle. He winces. It's contextually accurate, he says. She giggles. My brother does that when he's bored. Should I tell someone? No, you say. Just hide the rye bread. The girl leaves, and the room feels lighter. You both stand, stretch. Walk to the back shelves where artifacts gather, scraps of clothing, bits of charms, a stuffed bird someone once claimed spoke Latin when the moon was full. It didn't, of course. It barely squawked. But you keep it anyway. Proof that people will believe almost anything when they need an explanation. You pick up a small wooden carving. It's a toad, slightly lopsided. A child's toy? A witch's familiar? The jury, then and now, is out. A note tucked beneath reads, found near creek. Possibly enchanted. Definitely soggy. You leave it there. Later that afternoon, a minister arrives, Reverend Paris's replacement, though no one really says so aloud. He has a calm voice, a round face, and an uncanny ability to sit without fidgeting. He nods politely, places a thick book on your desk, and says, "We're hoping to update the church records." You flip through it. Baptisms. Marriages. Burials. And then, A small but determined tab labeled anomalies. You raise an eyebrow. He explains, we thought it best to acknowledge inconsistencies without judgment. You look at the tab again. Anomalies. Not accusations. Not executions. Just a soft euphemism, like saying unexpected weather instead of tornado. But it's something. You write a new entry. Church acknowledges errors in record keeping during trials. Recommends charitable acts in memory of the accused. It's not fire and brimstone. But it's more than silence. Outside, the sky bruises softly with early dusk. The townsfolk are beginning to light candles. You see one flickering in the schoolhouse window, probably the girl with the braid, giggling over barking boys and ghostly Latin birds. Your stomach growls. Grindle notices and digs in his satchel. He offers a slightly mashed biscuit and a wrapped sweet. This one's licorice, he warns. You grimace. We were doing so well. You nibble anyway. Across the room, the woman sorting garments has started humming. Something soft, vaguely familiar. A lullaby, maybe? It's amazing what songs survive when logic does not. You glance down at the ledger. One more entry for today. Rebecca N. never confessed, never cursed. Said only, I forgive you. You write it carefully. Some phrases deserve to be etched deep. You wake the next morning in the same archive chair where you fell asleep, a smudge of ink across your cheek and Grindle gently nudging your foot with his cane. Welcome back, he says. You were muttering about toads again. You blink the sleep out of your eyes, your back protesting like it's aged 50 years overnight, and sit up with the grace of a slouching cat. Outside, the air is clear. A breeze. The kind that makes you believe the town might actually move on this time. Today is quiet. Not quite market day, not quite Sunday, but something in between. You walk the streets with a slow, stretching pace, as if the bricks beneath your boots have softened overnight. Salem doesn't rush anymore. Not these days. You wander to the green, where the old gallows were, though there's no sign now. Just a stand of low trees, a few picnic benches, and a plaque so vague it could be mistaken for a bench donor's name. To those lost to fear. That's all it says. No names. No blame. Just the mood of an apology whispered into the grass. Historians still argue whether this erasure is healing or just polite forgetting. Some say the town hides its history under layers of charm and candle shops. Others say it's better to make space for the living. You sit on a bench and watch a woman walk by with a bouquet of herbs, yarrow, lavender, bay. Not for a ritual, just dinner seasoning. Still, there's a whiff of symbolism in the air. Salem's good at symbolism. You think of the teenagers. The original girls. Where did they all go? Most of them vanished into perfectly ordinary lives. Married, moved, melted back into anonymity. And Putnam later gave a public apology, scrawled out with a guilt-riddled flourish and read aloud in church. She was the only one. The rest said nothing. Imagine that, starting a moral panic, then folding the laundry the next day for 50 years. You walk toward the burial ground, not out of morbidity but because it's nice there. Trees shade the headstones. A crow struts on a low wall like he owns the deeds. You find the stone for Giles Corey, pressed to death for refusing to enter a plea. His final words? More weight. You whisper it like a mantra. The man was stubborn enough to become legend. There's another headstone nearby, this one modern, etched only recently. It lists several names once omitted from the official records. A gesture toward the forgotten. Or the deliberately left out. Beside it, someone's placed a ribbon, pale blue and tied in a loose, sleepy knot. You reach down and straighten it. It doesn't feel like much. But then, either did the accusations, and look what they sparked. You continue walking through the grass. No ghosts whisper. No cold spots form. Just dandelions, shadows, and the occasional squeaky squirrel. Turns out, memory's quieter than legend suggests. At the edge of the cemetery, you spot an old man reading a book titled Specters and Settlements. His dog lies curled at his feet, snoring. You nod at him. He nods back. a kind of mutual agreement not to ruin the moment with conversation. Back at the archive, Grindle started a new display. Ephemera of the Panic, the placard reads. Inside the case, a pewter thimble, a yellowed page of sermon notes, a child's drawing of a horned goat that looks more like a disgruntled potato. You stare at it a long time. Someone thought that was evil, Grindle mutters from behind you. You both chuckle. Then he adds, more softly, and someone believed it enough to hang a neighbor. There it is again, that strange mix of humor and heartbreak that Salem teaches you. It's never one or the other. It's always both. You spend the rest of the day cataloging letters. Most are dull. Shopping lists, weather complaints, invitations to quilting bees with suspiciously aggressive RSVP phrasing. But then, one catches your eye. It's unsigned. A scrawl barely legible. They said she flew? I only saw her jump the puddle. You copy it into your notebook. Not for evidence, just for the poetry. Later, as dusk folds itself around the village again, you take one last walk through the green. It smells like early autumn. Dry leaves, wood smoke, the faint tang of cider in someone's cup nearby. You think back to the first accusation. To the nonsense of it. The tension. The sheer ordinary chaos of a group of teenagers with too much time and too little supervision. You remember that one scholar suggested they were creatively bored. That they invented drama the way people today invent internet scandals, loud, fast, and with unpredictable consequences. Another theory blames fungus in the rye bread. Another says mass trauma. The truth? Probably all of it. And none of it. That's history for you. A patchwork quilt where the thread often snaps. You pass the schoolhouse. Inside, a teacher's pointing to a blackboard where someone scrawled, Salem, not just witches. You smile. She's trying. The night deepens around Salem, but you walk on, not quite ready to retreat indoors. The streets are mostly empty now, except for the occasional distant bark or the soft clatter of a pub's closing bell. You let your shoes carry you across cobblestone, under gaslight that flickers just enough to remind you of candles rather than electricity. You drift toward the outskirts, where the woods still lap at the edges of civilization. Not ominously, this isn't a horror story, after all, but with the calm of something older than all this. Older than the trials. Older than the colonists. Just trees and moss and the slow insistence of growth. Out here Salem softens. The village boundaries blur. You spot a small, half-crumbling foundation stone hidden under ivy, perhaps what remains of a long-lost barn or blacksmith's shed. A metal weather vane creaks faintly, though there's no wind. You pause beside it and try to listen. There's a theory you remember reading, that part of the reason Salem erupted the way it did was simply acoustics. That in a tightly packed village full of timber homes, whispers carried farther than they should. That secrets were always half public before they were even fully formed. Historians still argue whether such mechanics played a part, or whether the whole town was simply tuned to suspicion. Maybe it didn't matter. Fear finds a way to be heard, even without help from acoustics. As you walk, you see a small wooden sign pointing toward an old Quaker meeting house, now repurposed as a museum cafe. You almost laugh. If there's a more Salem thing than turning a dissenter's chapel into a place to buy witch-themed lattes, you haven't found it. You peek in. It's closed now, but you can just make out a chalkboard menu inside. Black cat brew, Pendle pie, and of course, the gallows blend. It's all very tasteful, which is to say, just tasteful enough to sell. Back on the street, you pass a bookstore. In the window is a carefully curated display of titles: Witchcraft in Early New England, The Devil's Courtroom, and The Teenage Brain, Then and Now. You smile at that last one. Inside, someone's sweeping. You wave. They wave back. Neither of you bothers to speak. The language of Salem at night is mostly nods and silences anyway. You head next toward the riverbank, where the water looks black but sounds silver. A couple of ducks sleep nearby, heads tucked and dreaming of whatever it is ducks dream about, hopefully not 1692. Along the path, someone's strung tiny paper lanterns from tree to tree. They bob gently in the breeze, and you wonder if they're for decoration or if someone just didn't want to stumble into the river after too much moon milk punch at the cafe. You find a bench and sit. There's no one around, no noise but water and leaves and the faint murmur of a sleepy town. You think about how many people lived through the witch trials and never got to see what came after. The restoration. The reevaluation. The gentle way the town now tries to balance the weight of memory with the need to keep going. Salem, in its odd way, has become a kind of therapist to itself. Hosting reenactments not to glorify, but to remember. Selling haunted house tickets next to quiet memorials. Admitting its past while trying not to live in it entirely. You recall one scholar's line, the town learned to exorcise its guilt with tourism. Fair. But there's also something earnest about it. Something soft. Something tired of hiding. You close your eyes briefly. Just to listen. Not to sleep, though sleep's getting closer now, a quiet weight on your shoulders. In the distance, the clock tower chimes. Not midnight. Just an ordinary hour. Nothing cursed. Nothing dramatic. You picture one of the girls, and maybe, or Mercy, sitting by a fire in her old age staring into the coals. Wondering if she dreamed it. If the frenzy had been real. If the people she named had truly deserved their fates. Or if she'd simply wanted to be heard. It's the kind of question you'll never answer, of course. And maybe that's the point. History, like sleep, doesn't always come when called. Sometimes it drifts in sideways, disguised as a dream or a footnote. You open your eyes and rise. Stretch. Your limbs feel heavier now, in that good way. Like you've carried enough story for one night. There's a comfort in walking through a place that has survived itself. The trials didn't define Salem, but they shaped it. The way an old scar shapes a face, not ugly, but memorable. You think of the plaque again, to those lost to fear. Not just those who died. Not just the accused. But everyone who lived through that time with their hearts in their throats, never knowing if they were next. You walk back into the heart of town, past shuttered shops and sleepy houses, past candlelit windows and crooked chimneys. And you feel, maybe, what those early survivors must have felt once the trials ended. Not joy. Not relief. Just quiet. And the deep, soft urge to rest. You make your way back toward the inn, your steps tracing familiar cobblestones now. The wind has softened. The air smells faintly of wood smoke and something baking, sweet, yeasty, maybe spiced. You imagine a kitchen somewhere nearby, just beginning to stir for the day, even as most of the town is still tucked away in beds and blankets. The inn's front lamp still glows, a steady amber welcome, and the wooden door creaks slightly as you push it open. The lobby is empty except for a sleepy cat curled near the hearth, one ear twitching in rhythm with the ticking grandfather clock. You smile. Even the animals in Salem seem to keep an eye on history. Upstairs, your room waits. There's something gently theatrical about Victorian inns. They try hard to feel haunted, but in truth, they're mostly just cozy. Your bed is turned down. A small book rests on the nightstand, Memoirs of the Salem Midwives. You resist the urge to flip it open. Just barely. You sit on the edge of the mattress and take off your shoes, one by one, like a character in a stage play winding down from the third act. And that's what it feels like now, a story gently coiling toward its end. A long, slow unraveling of threads, names, dates, ghosts, and girls. Salem's story doesn't conclude with a satisfying moral or a final twist. It lingers. It murmurs. It leaves room for interpretation, for apology, for uneasy laughter and cautious memory. Which, frankly, makes it perfect bedtime material. You pull the covers over your legs and sink back into the pillows. Somewhere in town, a museum docent is resetting her exhibit placards for tomorrow's tour. Down the hill, someone is emptying a tray of herbal sachets by candlelight. And a teenage girl, modern, bored, full of glitter and stress, might just be Googling Salem witches for a school project, unaware of how familiar she is to her 17th century counterparts. Historians still argue whether the girls of 1692 truly believed what they were doing, or if their performances were just that, performances. But maybe the answer lies less in belief and more in boredom, in loneliness, in the too still silences of a Puritan winter. When the world stops moving, the imagination stirs. And sometimes it stirs just enough to tip the scales of an entire town. You roll onto your side, the room gently dim, the shadows curling quietly along the corners of the ceiling. You think of Reverend Paris, haunted not by witches, but by his own paranoia. You think of Tituba, whose story flickers like candlelight, sometimes brave, sometimes tragic, always half-told. You think of Giles Corey, whispering more weight through cracked lips. And of all the unnamed townspeople who just wanted the whole thing to end so they could get back to planting cabbages and raising hens and not being terrified every time someone sneezed oddly. Quirky detail: for decades afterward, Salem's residents were reluctant to even speak of the trials. One local woman reportedly taught her parrot to recite "No witches here" just in case visitors got curious. The bird was a hit. Some say it even testified in a mock trial held by children decades later. The absurdity is never far from the fear. And that's the most human part of all. Your eyes grow heavier. The tick of the clock continues. The cat downstairs yawns audibly, then immediately falls back asleep like it never happened. You let your thoughts drift. Salem, once a center of panic, is now a town of quiet reckonings. Of plaques and performances. Of coffee mugs and candlelight vigils. Of history, recounted not to glorify, but to remind. That fear can be loud, and silence can be dangerous, and truth is often the last thing to be heard. You take a breath. Then another. Your pillow is cool against your cheek. Your mind finally begins to loosen its grip. The names of the accused drift through you, not as facts, but as lullabies. Bridget. Sarah. John. Rebecca. You don't need to remember every detail. Just the shape of the story. And the soft, steady truth that follows every storm. Sleep comes, eventually. And when it does, it asks no questions. So now, as the sky outside your window begins to take on the pale, forgiving hue of early morning, and the last ember of thought fades like a candle finally spent, you feel something settle. It isn't clarity. It isn't closure. It's gentler than that. It's the comfort of having listened. The quiet pleasure of having wandered through rooms of old worry and flickering firelight, through moments of misunderstanding, of fear, of strange laughter and soft remorse, and then having come out the other side with your breath steady and your body a little heavier with rest. The kind of rest that doesn't rush you. You breathe in. Slowly. The room around you still holds its shape. Four walls, a soft quilt, the subtle hush of whatever hour lies between night and dawn. But inside that shape, you're floating. Loosened. A little untethered. In the best way. And as the town of Salem slumbers below you, or begins to stir, in its curious blend of memory and merchandise, you let it all drift. The trials, the terror, the strange and sleep-hungry lives of those who came before. Let them go. No need to hold them too tightly now. Your story's been told. Their stories have been heard. And you? You're safe here. Heavy-limbed. Soft-breathed. Edging ever closer to sleep. So hush now. Let go. And I'll see you in the next one.